to get this Arthur Barnett's building, Beast building, whatever it's called, out of the way first. And I understand staff have a new recommendation, and if you'd like to resolve, table that, and then we can resolve that and move on.
Right. So the Arthur Barnett's building was formerly a Group 4, and only the facade was listed. Mm-hmm. So we've reviewed the listing and considered this new information about the loss of the internal staircase. And given that loss and the lack of the ability to inspect the other interior elements, which are essentially the ceilings, which were noted in the listing, the evidence doesn't really justify extending that listing beyond the facade, so we would like to revise that listing to list the facades on Colombo and Cashel.
Yep.
And it's worth noting that there's no other example in the central city where we have extended a listing from a facade to an entire building.
Right.
So we've checked the listing for
So
that.
this would have been quite unique if we had proceeded.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And the other thing that we'll do, given that we will only be listing the facade and those elements have been lost to the interior, we're going to revise the listing from high significance to significant.
Right.
So, and that matches really the Mackenzie and Willis facade, which
Right.
is, again, only the facade,
Yeah.
and is listed as a significant
Right.
building. So that's what we're recommending.
Thank you. Can I just clarify that it's the existing component of the facade? So what is currently listed? Because the area below the veranda is not currently listed and is obviously subject to major alteration in the retail design that's going in.
What we'd prefer to do is list the entire facade and then work with the owner in terms of what is done on the facade, so that it is in sympathy with the building. So there are elements on the below the veranda that are listed. At the moment there are 3 separate elements.
The Star Mart shop, the old Star Mart shop, and there's 2 signage areas.
That's
and
right.
then the facade above the veranda is listed.
That's
Could
right.
we just leave it as it is? Because obviously if you're putting shops on the ground floor will change and in all the plans that have been published, you can see that the ground floor changes quite dramatically.
Yes, listing it doesn't mean no change.
No,
there's no prohibition on change, and we expect all heritage buildings to change over time.
No. Can we just leave it as it is, please? Just don't extend the facade. Don't increase the area of the facade. What we've got of the facade, fine, leave it as it is, but just don't touch the ground floor.
The ground floor wasn't here.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't even listed. So the ground floor was not listed as heritage facade. The area above the veranda is the area we currently have listed as heritage facade.
And the elements on the ground
And the
floor.
2 elements.
And those other elements, yes. So the existing one's fine, absolutely fine.
So we are keeping the elements, though, on the ground floor that were listed?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
fine. What we currently have, we keep. But given that there isn't anything else much to keep, this marble staircase is gone, the ceiling needs to change to bring it up to engineering standards, and it actually gets a glass thing in it which features some of those elements of the ceiling.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that if there's any other comments from heritage
Thank you.
staff about impact of drawing the plan up that way now.
Well, the impact will be it's not consistent with any of the other listings in the plan in terms of our approach. Where there is remaining heritage fabric, and that may include changed heritage fabric as well, we've listed the whole building. If all we've got left is a facade, we've listed that whole facade. That's our approach. We haven't listed bits and pieces unless there are only bits and pieces remaining, such as the Theatre Royal, where we've listed the facade, the dome and the marble staircase, because that's simply all that's remaining.
Good. So could we just list the bits that are remaining, which were the existing heritage components? And actually we're now listing a facade which was built in 2001. The top 2 floors of that building were built this century, which is really unusual to be heritage, I would have thought.
The facade we'd be listing is the heritage facade, not the additions
So just
on the roof.
okay, so we're not listing the entire exterior of the building anyway?
No.
No, so we could leave off the area that's not currently listed below the veranda.
From my perspective, that's getting too finely grained. I'm not comfortable
Well, I'm
with
happy that we take the whole thing off, because it's not going to change. The exterior of the building is not going to change in the areas that are currently protected. I would like to protect those because I think they're a significant component. But what I don't want to do for a plan that's already in our resource consent area and already publicly released is stuff up the entire retail development that's going there. So I'm just not willing to do that. So I don't want to list new components of that building.
So I kind of had misunderstood. So when I saw that there was a new recommendation, I thought that you were recommending that the current listing, although moved from category 4 up to one of the other categories, remaining categories, I thought you were retaining just what was there now. So I wasn't alert to this issue of the additional coverage, and I'm not sure what the implications are, but
It's just worth noting that if there is an existing consent that has been lodged, there are no implications for that consent. So that consent will be dealt with through the district plan, the operative district plan, because the consents are dealt with according to the rules that are in place when they're lodged.
yeah, but I thought that so it's not the same as trees, so it's not when we notify that.
Hearings actually that takes effect later, isn't there a consensus now, so these rules are in place.
Yeah,
So
but I
can
thought
Can I update on the consent situation? So, as I advised on Wednesday, there's a certificate of compliance in for earthquake investigative works and a signage application in. So those are the applications that we have currently.
Okay, but clearly, if you've seen the flyover of the new development, there is major changes on the ground floor. That is not currently listed in any component of our heritage, right? The area above the veranda is listed, and there is that component that was, I think, Starmart or something, and 2 signage areas. It's kind of a patchy approach at one time when you look at it. But please, can we not add additional heritage areas to a development that is basically underway? That would, like, for a developer, that would stuff it up completely.
Yanni?
I think last time we met, we discussed getting sensitive legal advice. So can we get that legal advice? I feel very uncomfortable having this conversation without the legal advice that we were going to get around these sensitive issues.
Well, we can't do that in public.
Well, can we go into PX and hear it?
Well, I don't know. Well, I mean, the lawyers aren't available right now, but the trouble is that the legal advice is, there are elements of the legal advice that can't be dealt with in public that we can't take into account in our decision making.
Well, I don't know, because I haven't seen legal advice. I just know that last time when we wanted to discuss this, we were told we couldn't because we needed to get that legal advice.
I said I wanted legal advice. I've received legal advice. Staff have come up with a proposal which I thought was going to be a satisfactory solution. I wasn't aware that there was this difference in relation to the existing protection of the facade. So, and I don't know what the difference is. And I mean, on the one hand, we hear that existing consents are covered by the existing rules, but we hear that actually the consents aren't necessarily the consents that will be for the full development. So,
But what on earth are we trying to achieve? Like, we're trying to achieve the retention of that big sort of drained effect that you get coming into Kitchen Wall, aren't we? And the current walls retain that, and it is intended that it is retained. We're not intending to go with an entire facade
Look, the issue is that that's not a proper basis for a decision that we're making under the RMA. The proper basis for a decision under the RMA is whether it should be listed or not. And what I wasn't clear about when staff came up with an alternative proposal, which I thought would be an acceptable one to the council, I didn't realise that only components of the facade were previously protected. And I guess I'm looking to staff to explain why the whole of the facade now needs to be protected, or the historic part of the facade needs to be protected, when it wasn't considered worthy of protection before. I mean, what is the distinction? Because it actually sounds to me like administrative efficiency to do the whole lot, rather than a specific argument about protecting the whole. So perhaps if you could respond to that.
So when the operative plan was notified, the building as a whole was proposed for listing. And it's through, my understanding is through the submissions process for that plan that this agreement was made to only list parts.
So when was that?
90, when was the operative plan?
Notified in 1995,
95.
Right.
the operative city plan.
So it
Okay.
was the same owner at that time who made a submission and negotiated the reduced listing.
Right. So, so what's different now?
Well, we've come back full circle really, where the heritage professionals have looked at the building, assessed it on its merits, and come to the conclusion that the whole facade should be listed. The heritage facade.
So not the entire exterior of the building, right?
So,
We could say the 19, whatever date it is, 1930.
Right.
Facade.
So there is 2 stories of the building on top of that, which we're not listing, right?
no.
Right. So what makes it different to not list the ground floor as well? I mean, we're not listing the entire exterior anyway, even though that the top floors had to be built in sympathy with the building. Absolutely fine, worked well. But why would we currently have 2 out of 5 floors? You want to go to 3 out of 5 floors. Neither of them is the full solution, and one of them stuffs up the development.
No, I don't want to hear any discussion about the development.
Well-
It is not an RMA consideration. Can we just focus on that issue? The first part of your question is perfectly in order, the latter is not. So I'm hearing that it is administratively efficient for the council to list the whole facade. I'm not hearing what the difference is between the agreement that was reached back in 1995, which was acceptable to the council then. Why is it not acceptable to the council now, just to retain the coverage of the areas that were previously agreed?
Well, what we've been trying to achieve is a consistent approach to heritage assessment, and we've got a new methodology and criteria and thresholds, so we've applied that to all our heritage buildings.
But you applied that back in 1995, and an agreement was reached not to cover the whole of the heritage facade. An agreement was reached to cover part of it. Now, clearly, the heritage expert advisors that you are didn't agree with the decision that council made. But we're in a position now where we have to look at whether this is an administrative convenience or whether it's genuinely required, under the circumstances, whether it's genuinely required. It was a Category 4 listing of the 2 components plus the above veranda. So what is it that makes it a Category 2 for the whole of the that section?
Now, the Category 2 is effectively equivalent to Categories 3 and 4 in the old plan, because
Right.
we now only have 2 groups.
Yes.
So in that sense, it hasn't been promoted, as it were, although in fact it is of higher significance now, given that we've lost quite a number of similar buildings.
Yeah,
in the
I
central
think
city.
I can understand that. So we're. Yeah.
So the listing of the entire facade is except for those additions that are set back on the upper floor, is really about influencing the development of that entire facade. So it is exactly as Councillor Buck said, sympathetic with the other elements that are present. And those are the elements, of course, that people see most often from the street.
But given that the protection of the current protection enabled that to occur, isn't that sufficient protection for whatever happens in the future?
That's your decision to
Well,
make.
yeah, but I mean
essentially.
that's what I want to hear advice on. So what is it about adding more coverage to the listing that would provide, or what is it about just leaving things the way they are, you know, at category 2, but the coverage points at the existing coverage? What is it about that doesn't offer sufficient protection for that facade?
Then the council would have no say and no heritage input on whatever happens on that ground floor for those other elements.
But we've never had a say over the ground floor.
That is correct.
So what we're protecting is Starbucks, the entry to a basement which doesn't have an accessible, a barrier-free entry. We're protecting the entry to a bus exchange, which was added when that bus exchange went in there. We're protecting things, none of which happened in 1938, all of which happened in the 90s and the 2000s, and all of which were pragmatic responses to 2000s, and we'd be protecting that.
I should explain much more clearly that a heritage listing doesn't mean that we're prohibiting any change. So we're not protecting a particular element from any change. What we're doing is, through the resource consent, having an ability to influence that change and make sure that it is sympathetic with the entirety of the heritage facade. So it's a subtle distinction, if you like. It does imply protection of heritage fabric and heritage elements.
Can I just point out, in the Minister's letter, some of his expectations are that we minimise the amount of planning red tape. This is a development that is underway, and that we...
Seriously. It's not about the current development.
Okay, we have to facilitate a speedy, high-quality recovery and rebuild of Christchurch. That means that that building becomes central to an overall development plan for that retail block. And I don't think we want to slow that in any way, shape or form. And we want to ensure that Christchurch is a place where people want to live, work, invest and visit now and in the future, and probably shop as well. And that means some changes. And I mean, that facade has to change. We recognise that. The bus exchange has shifted, for example. So the entry to the bus exchange is no good. The basement element will change. It has to have good accessible access to the exterior. That garage door is a heritage item? Seriously? That garage door had no more heritage than mine. It's an obscene piece of work. It's horrible. It just does not in any way become worthy of protection.
Well, maybe that's why they want to protect it. Yanni?
I think it's really important to recognise that just because it has a heritage listing, the ability that gives is that when things are proposed to be changed, the heritage staff can look at it and do an assessment about the impact on a significant heritage building. So if you go into the statement of heritage significance, what you find is that the typical interwar commercial finishes are now a rarity in Christchurch since the earthquake. This was recognised as having high craftsmanship significance for the quality of its surviving decorative features, particularly plaster ceilings, canopy detail, and the bronze metal and granite shop fronts. It also goes on to talk about, it recognises that not all of the below the canopy, the original shop front remains, but there is Art Deco materials of bronze material and polished stone that do remain. Well, that's my reading of the heritage assessment. Well, I mean that's what's in the assessment. So.
And Starbucks.
But are they existing coverage?
Well, I would have thought. I mean, I don't know. Staff will know better than I do. But there might be some elements in that under the canopy
Yeah,
that are
but
still
there are
there.
elements that are already heritage accepted. They're already in our category 4.
They're not.
There are 2 elements that were under the canopy.
There is one part of the under the canopy area that is protected. No problem. No problem. It's probably where
So
those
then I
things
don't
are.
understand what's different from the staff assessment to what they're telling us that they want us to list.
Well, could you
Yeah,
tell
no,
me the
ta-
heritage components of Starbucks, Yanni?
No. It's not for a conversation between councillors. It's really for, what are the elements of the area that you want to now list that weren't previously listed that you want to protect?
So previously, below the veranda, the only elements that were listed was the shop front that Star March was in,
Yeah.
and that had those bronzed metal
Yes.
sections and those
They were
fanlight
agreed on
windows, the decorative metal panels that you were talking about, and there are also 2 metal display cases on the granite-faced columns.
Right.
So those were the elements below the
Okay.
veranda.
So what else needs preserving in that below the veranda?
So our perspective is, you're talking about the fabric that's been lost. There's fabric there that's non-heritage value, like the garage door you're talking about.
Garage door is definitely not
We're-
heritage.
We're not saying that's heritage value.
Yeah.
What we're saying is what's needed is to look at the building as a whole, and whatever further change you might make to those areas, whether heritage fabric or not, can affect the reading of the whole building and its overall heritage significance.
Yeah, no, I can hear that. What I can't see is that you can't protect that by protecting what's there. Like what you've already covered gives you the basis for that conversation with the developer.
Well, it doesn't, because there are whole areas of the ground floor shop fronts that we wouldn't be able to have a conversation with the developer about.
So they would put in a
They would-
resource consent for changes in those areas, and that wouldn't affect the heritage part of the building.
If it wasn't listed, they may not need to put in a resource consent for that at all.
So the top 2 floors are, the middle 2 floors actually are listed. So they can't alter that without talking to you. So in terms of the shop things that they want to do, they can only put in stuff that keeps those top 2 floors exactly the exterior, exactly as it is, right? When you look at that building, the heritage component is that big impact on that corner. I would have thought that's the landmarks of the heritage aspect that we're trying to protect. There is nothing outside of the ones that Helena's listed that is in any way worthy of protection or is in any way a heritage item. So let's assume that the building has to stay largely as it is, just because you've got to protect that facade, and it's assumed to protect that facade. Then whether a Starbucks comes out and another shop goes in with a much more interesting entryway doesn't really affect us, does it? In any way, shape or form, as long as it doesn't affect those significant heritage items. The rest of that ground floor has not got a heritage bit in it. So why would we pretend that it has? Or why would we?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the question about, what is it about the ground floor that's heritage that needs to be protected in that environment? I mean, I think Councillor Boats.
It's the potential for adverse effects of what you do in that area on the remaining building, because the ground floor shop fronts are part of that building, which is heritage fabric.
Yeah.
But we know that,
But
and
wouldn't-
that's already protected. So it can't. So, but Yanni, to say something has heritage value, it has to have heritage value. Sure, the 2 floors above it have heritage value. They're being protected. The existing rules are remaining.
Can I touch base on the rules for a moment in terms of what sort of following on from what Helen Beaumont was saying? And they do allow for a level of flexibility in the application on a case-by-case basis, looking at what is the impact of a particular proposal on particular parts of the building, its relationship to other parts of the building, so it can be seen and around. So I think it's important to, as Amanda was saying, to look at it in the round of that building. So there would be a conversation, an application to see what the impact would be of the proposal, and the level of detail of the heritage assessments. And I don't propose to speak to the detail of this, but it hasn't gone into the very fine grain for every single building.
The point that I'm making is that, you know, this was exactly the position in 1995, but the council negotiated a different position as a result of the submissions of the owner of the building. So now we're going to introduce another change, go back to where we were before, but we haven't got a submission process for us. It goes to an independent hearings panel.
So it's for the council. It's a matter of they've done the review in 1995, and now we do a new review based on new information, what is available.
But it's exactly the same decision.
Against the new planning context.
But it's the same decision. Same decision. I mean, nothing has changed. The heritage experts know that this is a heritage building, and they wanted to list the whole building, but as a result of the submission process, a decision was made by the council only to list parts of it. And I want to know why we would want to increase the coverage of the existing building when we don't have a process like we had before. I mean, you know, I suppose it can go off to the minister like this, and then the minister will come back and say, take it out. But I don't think that that's a comfortable position for any one of us. I just don't think that we should be, sorry, I really didn't realise that you hadn't come back with just a leave it as it is position. Phil?
It's going a bit round for me. It's no one's fault. I mean,
No.
But I thought you'd said that on the ground floor there's some areas that we would want to keep, and if we don't
They're
have
already protected.
Okay, so can you just sort of clarify what, and I haven't got the picture in front of me, what are those features? Are they the pillars or what? Well, can you just remind me again what we're talking about?
Okay, I don't have a full inventory of every.
No.
I've got the
standout features.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've got the listing. So it's the what was the Star Mart, Colombo Street shopfront, and that has a number of elements involved with it. And in addition, there are 2 metal display cases, which are mounted on the granite columns. So those are protected. But I think that we should be clear what protection does and does not mean. If you've got, I don't know if you've got the listing, the statement of significance in front of you, which has the photograph of the updated photograph of the Beaths building. And if you've got that in front of you,
a spare copy.
it's worth noting that the air bridge is obviously a new element, and that new element interfaces with the old 1930s facade. So protection is not no change. It is not thou shalt not touch those 2 floors that are original heritage fabric. There is change, and that change is managed through the resource consent process. So we're not saying where an element is protected, thou shalt not touch it, and where an element is not protected, you can do what you like. The approach to heritage is much more holistic than that, and that is why the recommendation is to list the facades simply and as a whole, and then assess any resource consent that comes in for change, and then provide advice to ensure there are not significant adverse effects on the remaining heritage fabric and how that building reads as a whole.
But it's not, because we're not listing the old store, the Discovery.
That's right, and that's set back. And that's a very good example of what you can achieve through a resource consent process, because that was
a very good example, Helen,
constructed
because do you know how long that took?
With the facade, and it was set back from the remainder of the building, so it reads as separately.
Yes. And it took a long, long time to get through, as did the air bridge. I remember the air bridge debate. I remember very well the school debate, and it takes a really long time. In terms of getting things happening in the city, what you've wanted to protect, the Star Mart, those cases, all of those things, absolutely fine. But there is nothing else in that ground floor of that building, which I know very well, or in the basement actually? Are we protecting the basement?
We're not saying, we've said 3 times that we're not protecting individual elements such that any change is prohibited. What we're saying
I
is
understand
that the
Helen.
listing enables, through the consent process, an assessment of adverse effects on the whole. So it's not about elements, it's about the building reading as a whole.